coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thung Earthlets, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, as always, Mark Char, and on this episode, we're taking a look at what's currently in the prog and taking a look at a bit of a classic from, almost 15 years ago. So first up, we have Ian Edginton and Matt Brooker, who are the creative team on STICKLEBACK, as well as Scarlet Traces and Helium. I got them on to talk about the return of STICKLEBACK after a few years, get them to explain themselves and ask about the themes and the ideas behind STICKLEBACK. For those of you who have not read STICKLEBACK before, I really do recommend picking up the first two trades. There was a bit of a big twist at the end of the most recent series, which hasn't been collected yet. So if you don't know what it is, stop listening now, skip ahead. So he was Sherlock Holmes. Nice big reveal, wonderful. We've not heard anything since. So Ian and Matt come on and talk about the strip and what their intentions for it are. We also talk a little bit about whether Helium is coming back and Scarlet Traces as well. And then it's great to welcome back to the podcast Kelly Kanayama, who was on our Dredd satire panel just the other week. She talks about Origins, the Judge Dredd story where John Wagner and Ezquerra went back to the origins of Justice Department, the takeover of the judges, and the creation of Mega City 1 as we know it now. So a nice, long, deep dive into that. So, that was a lot of fun. As always, if you've got any suggestions, thrillcast at 2000ad.com. Thrillcast, all one word, at 2000ad.com. Give us a share and a like on social media and on the podcast provider of your choice. Reviews do help to spread the word because it makes us go up the algorithm. It's great to be able to say that we are number one in our category at the moment. So thank you to everybody who supported the Thrillcast and spread the word. It seems to be working. Keep it up. So let's crack on and talk to Ian Edginton and Matt Brooker about the latest series of STICKLEBACK. So it's great to see STICKLEBACK back after a gap of a few years.
About 5 years, I think. Is it 5 years, Matt? I think so.
I think so. Yeah.
It's time has kind of like flown. It's got away from us because we tried to alternate between STICKLEBACK and Scarlet Traces, and then Matt did his Hellboy thing, and I was doing a couple of series of Iron Maiden and things. And before you know it, time's gone, and it's like, we better jump back onto this before we kind of. I had to reread it all because I couldn't remember it. It's like, okay. We've just actually done a bit in Scarlet Traces where Matt said this bit when they get the spaceship to go back to Jupiter. Yeah, okay. You do know we blew it up in the previous series, and I went,
To be fair to you, that was 2 series ago we blew it up, so you can be excused.
It's like, right, okay. But then I read an interview with P.D. James where she says that after she's finished the book, she forgets all the stuff that she's done. So, I don't feel alone in that, in which case. So it's all right for Phyllis, it's all right for me. So,
is it? You've got quite a few series on the go.
Yes.
So, there's Brass Sun, there's Helium, there's STICKLEBACK, there's Scarlet Traces. I guess you've just answered this question, which is, is it hard to juggle all these different things and give them the time that you feel they deserve?
I have a limited attention span. That's why I jump onto series, and then they get half finished, and I'll jump on to something else. But no, we need to do more Brass Sun, and we actually do want to come back and do some more Helium, and there's Kingmaker, and there's Things at the Eastern Front. So, but yeah, no, it's just kind of it's like I go, a pretty colour and a nice, I'll go off and that's it. It's like, but yeah, it's yeah, sometimes it's like I'll do one thing and go, okay, now I need kind of like a palette cleanser and do something else before I come back onto. Because sometimes I've written a couple of series in a row, like with the Iron Maiden thing, and after a while you feel like you're running out of steam a little bit. You kind of want to just, like say, cleanse your palette, do something different, and then kind of come back. I mean, when I get stuck on a script, what I'll do, I'll jump onto a script for something else. And because it's, if I'm stuck on a Scarlet Traces thing, I'll go, oh, then I'll jump onto a Kingmaker, and it's a different part of your brain, you know what I mean? So then you come back and it's kind of fixed itself. But yeah, no, just, the time just goes so quickly. That's the frightening thing. It's so exciting. But no, it's nice to get back, because especially with Scarlet Traces, Stickleback, because, we knew we had to finish the story, because we left on it such a reveal, where he is Sherlock Holmes, spoilers. And so we had to kind of complete that story. So yeah, I'm kind of glad we finally got round to it.
Matt, as an artist, you don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to jump around like a writer necessarily can. When you're coming back to a project that you've not worked on for some time, particularly one with such a distinctive visual style as Stickleback, is it a difficult process to restart that kind of mode of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think my equivalent to Ian's thing is largely to stop myself getting stale. I always try and find slightly different ways of doing things. And even though it's quite subtle, you'll see that I have different ways of working on different series, but I also will change the style very slightly on the series I'm working on, depending on the content. So, for example, with Scarlet Traces, the third one, which is pre-Rebellion, was I very much tried to do it in a sort of Frank Hampson kind of painted style to be reminiscent of Dan Dare. But the most recent, like, Cold War stuff in this one has really been more like the 60s stuff from, John Burns, and those guys who were all using like sort of big chunks of color in the shadows. I always think of that as a very kind of like 60s thing. And so I'm trying to like reflect the content that way. Stickleback, every time I start a series of Stickleback, I go to the first page and think, what the hell did I do last time? And I don't think I've ever done all the series. I think because Stickleback looks so different from everything else, I think it's the one that's been most consistent with itself. But the first episode of every series of Stickleback is kind of like a Mensa puzzle, where I'm kind of pulling bits from memory and trying to work out what the hell I did to sort of get particular effects. So it kind of takes about an episode usually to get it together, and then I'm back in the run. But I do also the technique has kind of evolved over time. So I can actually turn out an episode now with a lot less effort than when I did the first series, because I've kind of got the technique down pat. But that kind of also sometimes makes it a little bit less interesting, because you're not having to think through every problem afresh every time. I think it was Rowan Atkinson said that when they were doing Blackadder, everybody kind of loves the second series onwards, but the first series was the most interesting for him to do because they hadn't established anything. And so they had to kind of build the whole thing from scratch. And even though a lot of it didn't work, it was that whole kind of constructing from nothing that was the most interesting part of it for him. And it's kind of not quite like that, because it is nice to sort of settle down into a sort of old pair of shoes and work. But yeah, there is this sort of transition. And Stickleback is the hardest one to transition in and out of. Like, I've gone from that back to Scarlet Traces, and at the moment I'm kind of in the transition shock from like not putting outlines around things to back to putting outlines around things, which is both easier and kind of slower, weirdly. So it's sort of, there's this kind of payoff.
For those who might be unfamiliar with the series, you wanted to talk about the building blocks of inspiration behind this idiosyncratic style, let's put it that way.
Okay, well, most of what I get it from is is when I started doing Stickleback. Stickleback was this second series that I'd done for 2000 AD, and there'd been a gap. The first thing we did, was Leviathan, and with that, 2000 AD will usually have a bunch of color and a black and white strip. And for years, I was the guy who did the black and white strip because I could think of like interesting things to do with black and white. And so when we did Leviathan, I came up with this thing, because I was working digitally, which was quite unusual at the time, of doing like grey outlines on black, which has this very particular look to it. It was very distinctive, and I got a lot of very good feedback from that. But then I had a gap of a couple of years of not doing anything for 2000, came back to do Stickleback, and it's like everybody had started putting grey tones on everything in the black and white, and that look wasn't going to be distinctive in the way that it had been before. And though there's this guy, he's Uruguayan by birth, but he worked in the Argentinian comics industry. He's called Alberto Barachia. He's actually the father of Enrique Barachia, who does tons of stuff for the Americans these days. And in the 1980s, he and a guy called Juan Sasturén did this kind of satire of the political, of the dictatorship in Argentina called Perimus. And it's done in this really kind of like bizarre art style, which is like part watercolor painting and mostly collage. And I've actually no idea how the original was done. I've seen an exhibition where there were pages, and like sat there with my nose right up to them, and with your nose in front of them, trying to like catch the light and work out what's what. You still can't work out how the hell he did it. But I remember seeing this kind of like combination of kind of like smooth painted stuff and the textures and all that, and thinking that was a kind of really novel approach that I'd never seen before. So when it came to coming back to 2000 and trying to find something else that would be distinctive, I basically just kind of shamelessly pinched that whole kind of concept wholesale, really. And I've done my best to make it my own, but I've also tried to kind of use that kind of platform as a way of getting more people to getting kind of understanding of like Barachia's existence out to more people. So I've kind of blogged about it. I think for a long while, I don't know about now, the blog posts I did on Barachia were like the main English language thing you got if you Googled his name. So yeah, there was definitely this sense of what that gave me was the ability to focus, do a kind of Terry Gilliam and focus on the kind of like the grime and the stink of the past. There's a lot of Stickleback is set in these kind of odd, kind of fairly squalid corners. So, previously when you'd seen kind of representations of the Victorian era, it tends to, in comics, it tends to look sort of fairly kind of polished. And what I wanted to do is to kind of get down in the sort of gunge of it, because that's what it's about. It's not about the kind of, gentleman adventurer sitting in his smoking jacket and solving mysteries. It's actually about the kind of freaks and the guys down on the streets creating the mysteries in a way. That was kind of how I saw it. So that was kind of the thing that kind of brought me there.
It's particularly in the kind of supporting characters and like you say, the environment. It feels very Dickensian, kind of crossed with Ian McHugh.
Yeah,
who does all those wonderful kind of piles of buildings. That kind of seem to defy gravity but look solid at the same time. It's wonderful stuff. Has there been a temptation? Well, first off, has that style evolved beyond getting easier? Has the style evolved as the series has gone on? Do you feel that you've been consistent? Have you learned anything?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that like the first series, I was really kind of completely finding my way, and so like every time I was trying to work out how to do something, I was kind of thinking, what would Alberto Barachia do? And now it's got to the point where that's all completely gone, and the techniques kind of become transparent. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking at the script and going, okay, I need to draw a conservatory full of aspidistras, or a building on fire, or a dark alley full of footpads or something, and I can just kind of take this kind of vocabulary of textures and stuff, and just sort of pull the stuff out that I need to create the thing that I'm looking at. So it's definitely become mine. I think what I'm getting more and more more and more interested in, and this occurs actually with all the strips that I'm doing, is actually trying to think through a little bit more the kind of storytelling side of it and the layout side of it, because that at the moment is something I kind of worry is a little bit pedestrian. I think I'm quite good at actually getting the flow of the story across, but I kind of worry that the actual sort of like setup of the pages doesn't especially set the world on fire. So I've kind of got past the sort of worrying about the kind of look of it, and I'm trying to think a bit more about the structure of it now.
One thing I'm interested in, it's the natural assumption is that what's in the script affects the art. But Ian, has what Matt has been doing for the art come to affect the way that you write the strip?
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw some ideas in, and then Matt will interpret it, and it's just, and I'll go, oh, that's really cool, and he can do that now. So I'll get him to do this. But yeah, I mean, it's more than anything. It's kind of like inspirational, just seeing the stuff that Matt's come up with, and it kind of fires things. It's becomes like a bit of a Mobius loop. I'll put the stuff in, Matt will do something really extraordinary, and it will fire me off to do something else. And I'll try to rein it back from what we used to be, where there will be so many like visual references. I think at one point we had it where there was a greenhouse with all the different kinds of triffids that have been in movies and things and so on, and then we had like all the different insect species are in Doctor Who, like the Wirren and the and they're just in the background. They don't add anything to the story, and I reached the point where I just thought, this is it's so labour intensive, and Matt, with his good graces, I must have been doing his nuts sometime, thinking he wants me to do what. So I've tried to rein it back a little bit from this kind of series. But yeah, no, I mean, it's always, with all the artists I work with, but especially with Matt, because we've worked for so long, I find his stuff really inspirational and gets the kind of creative juices kind of going. So.
And like you say, that definitely feeds around to me. I mean, what I wait for in every series. Are we allowed to swear on this?
Yeah.
Okay, there's what I call the "oh fuck" page, which is I'll open up a script and Ian will go, okay, we're over the moon and there's 12,000 spaceships and every one of them are different, and here's the list of what they all look like, and I go, oh fuck, how am I going to draw this? But the thing is that I know with the "oh fuck" page that once I've got it done, that's the one that everybody will remember from that series for the next 20 years, So I see those as kind of like the sort of cornerstone of my reputation in a way. So yeah, there's definitely that. The funny thing about the references is it wasn't so much that I was sort of cursing having to put all this stuff in. It was playing to a kind of bad side of my character. It was kind of triggering this kind of OCD part of me. So that thing where we had the page with all the different plants, all the triffids and stuff, that I wasted about 3 hours going through old episodes of like Star Trek, the animated series, because I knew there was one about a whole planet of plant monsters. And I eventually found this and screen grabbed them all, and they're all I sort of added those in on top of everything else. So you kind of have to watch that. It was sort of like setting me off. So it's.
So what Matt said in the new Scarlet Traces, there is an oh fuck double page spread, and which is I'm not going to release any details, but yeah, I just said we will be able to do this, and he's like, so and he's sent me a breakdown, and it's like, oh, okay. And finally, and bizarrely, because I was going to send him a sketch of what I'd had in my head and never got round to it. The sketch I did, the thing that Matt came up with, is pretty much identical to what I had in my head, which was thinking that's just uncanny. So,
well, it was just a really good description, is what it was.
It's not, though. It's a product of having worked together for so long that you know, you kind of get to a point where you're of a like mind on certain things.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, we do joke that we're a bit of an old married couple, really.
We did an interview at one of the Bristol conventions. They interviewed a pair of us. And I said we should get in pajamas, get to be like Eric and Ernie, and have a newspaper and a pipe, and just, you know, so. But yeah, no, there is, you know, kind of knowing each other's minds, and the references, you know, will go, oh, do you remember that or this, and so I'm being besieged by cats at the minute now. Got an office full of cats, and they hate each other. So if you hear yowling and spitting in a bit, that's so.
Well, let's talk in some more detail about Stickleback, because it was an oh fuck moment.
Yes.
There were one or two people who kind of maybe half guessed. You know, there's a lot of hindsight going on. It's, oh yeah, I saw this coming ages ago. But I seem to recall that this was always the point that would discover that Stickleback was Sherlock Holmes.
Yes. Yeah. It was. The series essentially has been him working through therapy in a way after the Reichenbach falls, and he lost his memory and basically built his personality from his cases, and then as he's gone on, he's kind of healed and realised who he is and things and so on, and so until in the end he kind of dispenses with the disguise, and he's back. And I also wanted the series to have forward motion. I didn't want it to be just kind of, oh, here's the steampunk villain of the week, you know, it's Dr. Jekyll, or it's a Cthulhu, or it's, you know, everything kind of builds up his therapy and his realization of who he gradually is, until in the end he kind of goes, okay. And also, though, when he does, you know, go, I am Sherlock Holmes, he's not the Holmes that he was. He's been through stuff. He's a father, you know, so I kind of don't, when I adapted the 4 Sherlock Holmes novels ages ago for Self-Made Hero, and there's always the tendency to look at him as almost like being a superhero, you know, there's the Shadow, there's Doc Savage, there's Sherlock Holmes, and he's not. He's very much of a flawed person who clearly had like autistic tendencies when he was still the consulting detective. So, you know, we've kind of built on that, and so now he's Sherlock Holmes in name, but what's his personality like now, which is going to be so we've kind of like come to the end of one enormous big arc, and then the next thing will be how we move on. And also we built up the background cast of characters, especially I think the one that Matt and I really like is Miss Scarlet, where she was essentially meant to be an ex-madam kind of thing, and lots of tattoos and things and so on. And she was almost like an ancillary character, but the way she's been grown over the years, she's really developed a strong personality, and she stands up to him. She's been through a lot, and she's essentially his Watson, but she's not a beta character. She's very strong in her own right. So I'm quite interested to see how that dynamic's going to go on when we do the next lot. So
there's been so many versions of Holmes in recent years. I mean, even more so since the character entered the public domain. You know, we've got things like the Guy Ritchie films, with Enola Holmes, which came out recently, and of course the BBC version. You've kind of already answered this, but how is this Sherlock different to those? And is there always a temptation, as someone who clearly knows the Conan Doyle books inside and out, to slip into that very familiar image of Holmes?
Yeah, there's the tendency, but I think because we've changed so much, like I say, you know, he fell in love, he actually had a child, he's actually been a criminal. And so in many respects, like in his subconscious, he kind of, by taking over the underworld, he enforced his rule on it. So he kind of managed the underworld in a way. So so now he's come back the other side, and he's a crime fighter again, but he's still got that kind of like foot in the other camp. He knows, you know, he knows he's done dark things now, and so it's how that shaped. And so we're kind of like trying to open up a new dimension to the character, a new, and so also he's got to live with the things that he's done as well. So it's he's not necessarily going to be embraced by the police because he's back, and also one of the other things is how is Watson going to feel because he thought he was dead. Because in Sherlock Holmes we have the empty house, which is a story where Holmes comes back and it's only been a few years. Well, this has been a decade or something at least, kind of thing. So it's how does all that fit in? And Holmes is definitely a different character. So it's what are his motivations going to be? Where does he fit into that world? Because he said before the Reichenbach falls, it was kind of normal Victoriana, but afterwards, when he'd come back, it's a world full of dinosaurs and dinosaur servants and clockwork men and things. So the world has completely changed. So it kind of gives us a bit of a free rein to go in a new direction and just see. Because if you can have Henry Cavill as Sherlock Holmes, his muscle strength, or the Guy Ritchie ones, then we can play with a format. I think we're allowed.
And Matt, has this influenced how you've presented Holmes with the big reveal and now as you're going into the new series? Is there an archetypal Holmes that you've drawn on for the way that you've presented him, or are you trying to express the things in his physicality that Ian has just been talking about regarding his personality?
It's kind of interesting because I had done some at different times some Sherlock Holmes illustrations for different people, and so I sort of developed a Holmes that was mine. But when we came to Stickleback, Ian had some specific ideas. There's a reasonable amount of Jeremy Brett in the Holmes that you get in Stickleback, but he's very quickly kind of become his own distinct character. And it's got to the point now where I'm really kind of feeding off him as an Ian character within the script, rather than particularly relating him to Conan Doyle when I write him. I think in a way it's like, no, there were certain kind of key elements from other interpretations that fed into the character design, but I think already for me it's sort of taken on its own momentum. And when I go back to it, I think I'm going to be thinking much more about the Holmes that we've had in the last series of Stickleback than kind of the history of it. It's kind of an odd one. It's like I say, it's sort of its own momentum, really.
One of the things I'm particularly interested in with this new series is without doing too many spoilers, is return to some of the mythical elements that I think are at the beginning of the second book. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I wondered what you felt, Ian, about using these elements at a time when Englishness, English history, English politics are, let's use this euphemism, in flux.
Ooh, that's a deep one. Wow. I'll get back to you.
I think my point is because Victoriana and Steve, which is fundamentally rooted in the colonialism of the period, let's put it that way, are so often an aesthetics that can override the reality of the situation. So use of that aesthetic is in itself a political position. And the strip is also has one of the all-time English characters in it. So I just wondered your feelings about writing a series like this at this moment in time.
I hadn't thought about it consciously, but I suppose it might come because, for example, when we use the descendants, the little dinosaur race, that basically the Victorians, or especially, it almost make a slave culture. So, like, they have them as servants and things and so on, and also the use of mechanical So we kind of like factor that in, and also say how it's it's not a good idea kind of thing. But I mean, I suppose to try and use like English, those kind of tropes, there's and like folk horror stuff and things from an English mythology. Just all kind of like mash it all in and see what comes out. It's not done with any kind of conscious purpose, but it's just sort of what character can we use here, or what can we reference here. I don't in any way use it as like jingoism. I think that's a balloon I like to pop. I think I'll set things up about Empire and then we'll deflate it. We'll kind of and the dark side of things. I always kind of I like to play devil's advocate with a lot of stuff. So it's kind of so if we set something up, we like to be prepared to tear it all down as well. I don't know. Ooh, it is an interesting. Yeah, it's not something I've done. I just tend to just do it and and see how it goes. But I mean, with the presence of climate, oh my goodness, I don't know where to. I just can't bear to watch the news these days. It's just so but I'm at a bit of a loss on the whole. I can just waffle some more, but I don't.
Could I weigh in on this for a second? Because I mean, I think one thing about this is you do have to be careful about using these symbols. But if you look at the thrust of, I mean, one of the things I love about Ian's work is that if you look at the sort of major thrust of it, and it's certainly present in Stickleback, there's this constant theme of kind of punching up for the little guy. There's this constant kind of critique of things like authoritarianism and colonialism. And it's kind of funny. I'd been aware of this because my partner works in classics in Greek and Roman history. And she's recently been doing a lot of work on ancient Sparta, including she's been doing some international Zoom calls, symposium things on like the way that Sparta is used in modern culture. She's been collaborating with, she actually collaborated with Kieran Gillen on a thing called 3, which was like an anti-300 where 3 slaves escape from the Spartans and you follow them. And one of the problems they had with that was how to deal with the fact that in Greece, the far right is co-opting all the Sparta imagery, essentially to promote fascism. And so they had this very awkward situation where they were doing this symposium, which was sponsored by the government of Sparta. And they had the mayor of Sparta in on these Zoom calls, basically trying to kind of push right-wing propaganda while all the academics are going, no, of course that's not what we don't want to do. So, yeah, I mean, particularly in this kind of world, you've got to be careful on how you use these symbols. But I think there's something kind of pretty innate to certainly the way I've seen Ian use them, which is definitely kind of more in the sense of subverting them. I think that's a kind of classic 2000 AD tradition as well, is that you kind of take these tropes and sort of subvert them and kind of get people to sort of just kind of question a little bit these kind of archetypes they've been given. But yeah, I mean, there's elements within Stickleback that kind of come from Victorian fiction that are really kind of pretty un-PC, and I do occasionally worry about playing with them, but I think there's also a value to taking these things and bringing them out. And I mean, for example, Black Bob or Tonga. I mean, Tonga is a pretty horrible racist stereotype from the Conan Doyle stories, from the Sherlock Holmes stories. But I think Ian really kind of managed to humanize him and turn him into this character who became a real kind of favorite within the story. And I mean, I'm definitely still of the opinion, I don't know, this is certainly my personal headcanon, that with Black Bob and Tonga, we actually gave 2000 AD its first openly gay couple. So.
Yeah, that's true, and that just kind of evolved on its own. And I just thought, they're a couple because only Black Bob could understand what Tonga, and I thought they are, and so we just wrote in the affection, and it's when they got killed off, I was really moved. Reading it back in my own stuff, I just thought, oh, that's really quite sad. But what Matt was saying, funny enough, I think it's more. I was more conscious of it when we were doing Scarlet Traces, because when we had Aaron Shakespeare and the Venusian refugees who'd moved to Smethwick in the 60s and things, because I grew up in Smethwick in the 60s. My mum ran a sweet shop around the corner. It was very inner city Birmingham, massively multicultural. And so I kind of just wanted to draw on that and reference it. And so so that was a conscious thing. But I think some of the stuff in Stickleback, I mean, I kind of it's kind of done a bit subconsciously without kind of but putting in those tropes. So I'll just write it down for you.
So a lot of steampunk. I'm not saying all steampunk, but a lot of steampunk just doesn't engage with these issues at all.
No, it's that's sometimes. Sorry to cut you off. That's sometimes where I find it a little bit hard with some stuff. Is it kind of either glosses over or kind of ignores what went on then, and especially what we saw, with the putting down of the statue in Bristol, and the slate and all. This that history still has repercussions today, and so. You can't really ignore it. You have to kind of factor it in for good or bad. We did these things, and we have to acknowledge them, and kind of and be able to try and move forward. So, go on. Sorry, you're saying?
No. I it was going to turn into a point that so much of steampunk just borrows the aesthetic and then doesn't say anything with it. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but there's a wonderful song on YouTube called Stick Some Gears on It and Call It Steampunk. It really lays into the whole thing. And that's to do with aesthetics and things like that.
Yeah.
But with... just coming back to intent on Stickleback, because, like you said, you'd intended for him to be Sherlock Holmes all along. But has the series evolved in unusual ways? Did you ever think you would get to the kind of things you're writing about in this series? Was this the intention, or is this the kind of stuff that has evolved around the structure of the reveal about Sherlock?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had the idea for the first couple of arcs, and I knew roughly where it was going to go, and so it's kind of followed that route. But some of the story trappings have changed along the way, and some of the Miss Scarlet, as a case in point, she wasn't intended to be where we are now. She's actually really grown as a character, and like Matt said, Black Bob and Tonga, we've actually developed a relationship that so things like they it's the cliche, but the characters do take on a life of their own in essence, and so that's kind of factored in as we've gone along. So but yeah, it was all kind of like building towards this point where, like I said, I wanted the character to evolve, and so he rediscovers who he is, and then we kind of move on in a new kind of arc after that. It's kind of the idea I had in mind at the very beginning was the old Fleetway villain, the Spider, where he started off as a villain and then became essentially a hero. And so it was. I thought, let's kind of take that idea and run with it. But then it's like, wouldn't it be a good idea if it was actually Sherlock Holmes as well? It's like, aha. So I just making more trouble for myself. I am where we expected to be, but we've meandered a little bit along the way, but we've got there.
Considering the gap between the reveal and this series, did you think, maybe I should do a bit more recap? Yeah,
I've tried to cover a little bit, but it's tricky. It's I can't remember the name of the TV writer now, but he said, I'd rather have the audience confused for the first 10 minutes than bored for the half an hour. And so it's, I like to put a degree of recap in, but I don't necessarily think it's my job to tell, to spoon feed everybody. It's like, because I've done it before. I've jumped into the middle of a run on something or picked up the third book in a 4-part series, and so it's it just means you have to put a bit of extra work in. But so I do sum up to a point, and then it's. I think in Brass, what we did for one of the recaps, we had the two protagonists wandering around a market, and there was a shadow puppet play, and so we were able to, through the shadow puppet play, recap some of what had gone on. So if there's a way of doing it that way, then fine. But otherwise, it's just. I mean, I remember back in the day with Marvel Comics, every issue used to have a recap of what had gone before, because I said every issue is a jumping on issue, and that was so, it really tied your hands. Kind of, the first couple of pages were always going to, so, yeah. It's,
I mean, even in 2000 AD, you look at like classic Strontium Dog, and there's always that recap, those recap captions.
Yeah.
In the first kind of splash image, and that was great when you're reading it every week. But the second you collect it, and
yeah,
a lot of caption boxes.
I mean that there's kind of an interesting tension now, because you've got these things that are published serially, but where they're actually going to live forever is in the collections. So I mean, I suppose that must be a kind of tension that you have to deal with.
Yeah, well, I guess it's a balance that lots of people just they're just it's being published to go in a graphic novel, whereas I think actually an awful lot of 2000 AD strips, whether people do it whether it does it to the extent that people want to do it or not, are followable. One of the strengths of the comic has always been that you can just dive in.
Yeah, I mean that's it's tricky with 2000 because do you do the recap or and then other people going, oh, I can't follow what's going on because I haven't remembered from the last series, and it's like, well, in the beginning I think, I'm trying to please everybody, then I just go, oh fuck it, you know what, I've just got to please myself, and it's like I'm doing it, and you can catch it up. You can't second guess yourself in the end. It's just like, right, I'm going to do it this way, because if it starts to impact on the story and you've got to make allowances for this and that, it's just like, no. So that's it now. I've reached an age. I'm nearly 60. Fuck 'em. I'm doing it my way. So excuse my swearing. Sorry.
No, it's right. There was a comment you made earlier that suggested in the moment to me that we are coming towards the end of the Stickleback story.
Yeah, it's kind of it's been a bloody big arc, basically. It's just and so there will be more. We kind of set him up. His life has moved on. As with everybody's life, it's when you reading comics when you were a kid, there was always the illusion of change, but nothing really changed. And so I want this kind of there is change. We've set things up. And there are villains in the background. There's things gone on. There's people he's affecting. Like Watson. What's going to happen? And Lestrade. And so he's reached that point. He's actually come out. The world knows he's back. And so there's all the repercussions of that. So it'll still be kind of Stickleback, but it's now it's Holmes kind of thing. I think we'll keep the name, but it'll be primarily him. And it's kind of his adventures and his crew in the world. And it's, I wanted to move him on, because sometimes you can tread water with a character for so long and people just get bored and so I'd rather move on, do something new, and fail than people just get bored with what's going on. Going, okay, we're just going to wind it up. So and there's some of the series now that kind of I'm working on with Matt, with Tharg, that I know are going to be it's 6 series, and that's it. It'll be so many trades, and it's we can tell more, but that's like a nice arc full or something. So it's yeah. So there we go. Sorry.
Let's talk a little bit about the other series that you have together, which we've kind of touched on, which is Scarlet Traces and Helium. And I want to talk about Helium because it has been a long time since we've seen anything with that. And one of the reasons why I like it is because it certainly visually it is such a contrast to Stickleback. It's so bright and full of bold colours. Please tell me that there is, maybe not imminent, but soon.
We have never forgotten about Helium. I mean, Helium it was this kind of ironic thing in that the kind of launch point for it was to kind of do a Scarlet Traces for 2000 AD. and then 2000 AD bought Scarlet Traces, which is why there hasn't been any Helium for a while. And I'm kind of really touched. People still ask about it, that anybody kind of remembers it at this point. Because I'm really kind of touched that it's kind of made enough of an impression for people to ask about it and want more. I think there was one point where I was really busy with Scarlet Traces where we did discuss getting another artist in on it. But I'm certainly happy to go back with it. And I think at the moment we're maybe talking about doing another series of it once we've got the current Scarlet Traces out of the way. If Matt is up for that. But we'll see. I mean, the scheduling decisions are always subject to revision and whatever. But.
Yeah, it is a series that stuck with me just because it was, I guess, just an intriguing setup. You know,
yeah, no,
a bit of the world.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that, oh, look, as Matt said, you know, we were going to do it in place of Scarlet Traces, then you had Scarlet Traces. It's like, oh, okay, and I think when it got collected in one of the things that came out of the bags with the magazine, you know, and I think we kind of both thought, oh, okay, maybe that's just that. Then, you know, we will. But there has been more response, and Matt did say, you know, Helium, and we went, oh, okay, yeah. So we'll kind of definitely do more because there's a lot more to say. As ever, it's hours in the day, and whatnot. And we wanted to get more Scarlet Traces done as well, because that's kind of reaching not an end point, but kind of like we're closing a chapter on that part of the story kind of thing. There's more Scarlet Traces, but we're kind of going to be dotting about on the timeline as well. So we'll find there's events that get referred to and things that happen that we're kind of maybe going to go off and see. It's partly a little bit inspired by the collection of short stories that I edited, you know, the pro short stories for Abaddon, where, you know, people took the history and the timeline and wrote their own stories. And so and as I was writing the comic strip, I always had ideas that, you know, there was no room to fit. So it's like, okay, let's go back and tell this story here in the 1920s in America, or let's go and do this, you know, here. And so there's going to be room for that. But yeah, it's good to get back to it. It's kind of, when we've opened our Earth solar system, so we find out it's a busy neighborhood now. So
I hesitate to ask this because you've already got a lot on that, you know, you need to crack on with. But I'm guessing that you're still talking. There's still ideas that are probably popping up. Matt, is it sometimes a case of trying to keep Ian on target with stuff? Does he wander off a little bit occasionally?
Not really. I think the nearest we've come to that is Ian's got a real knack for writing these dramatic series finales where he's then got no idea how to get out of them to start to the next series. So we have had a couple of times where we've been on the phone sort of like trying to work out what the hell you would actually do to kind of get the character out of the situation from the last episode of the last series to get the next series started. And usually I come up with all these ideas and then none of them are any good and ever get used, but hopefully they spark something. So I think that's the closest to it. I mean, what will often happen is that Ian will ring me up and go, "Ooh, I've got an idea for this kind of a story," and we'll maybe sit and chat, and I can kind of just act as a sounding board, and occasionally I'll sort of come up with some odd little detail, like, you know, wouldn't it be great if they're actually all elves, or what if that guy had 3 elbows or something, and you know, but I don't think there's kind of really a problem with kind of focus in that sense. No, Ian's always struck me as actually, I mean, you sort of portray yourself as kind of charmingly scattershot, but when I actually sort of hear you talking about your stuff, you always seem sort of pretty solidly focused to me. It's a mind like a steel trap.
Thank you. Well, Matt and Lynn as well. They're like phenomenally well read and well educated, and so I'll bounce things off Matt. And Matt will go, "Oh, did you know the Greeks invented toffee apples?" And I go, "Oh, really? Okay." And then that'll kind of be, and we'll be off. That way. Egyptians invented foot rubs. And
it's true. I am a student of the first water.
Bizarre things or shoot off. Disraeli collected hamsters or something. It's just, and it's like, oh, okay, that's great. It's because I remember. I mean, just stupid things. I remember reading somewhere that Hitler personally owned so many thousands of acres of like Californian desert or something like that. They found out after the war, and it's like, okay, and you go, well, what was he going to do with it? Why did he? It's like, what was, and so, and like say, so Matt with the Greeks inventing toffee apples and whatnot, it just kind of fires things, comes at you from a different direction. You go, okay, and so it starts the process and the wheels grinding and me researching stuff that I wouldn't have thought of, and we're off.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed to Ian and Matt for chatting away there. Now, Judge Dredd Origins is a series that began back in 2006 with a prequel called The Connection before going into a different kind of epic. John Wagner decided to go back and look at the origins of Judge Dredd and his world and how, in particular, the judges came to power. The story of Judge Fargo, and wrap it up in a really fascinating framing device, rather than just it be a prequel story. It is a story being told from a couple of viewpoints. Absolutely amazing, dense storytelling. Incredible Carlos Ezquerra artwork, of course, but for the first time it set the record straight on how the judges came to power and how Mega City 1 came to be. So Kelly Kanayama, who is a comic scholar and critic, came on to talk, to do a deep dive on the collection of Origins and talk about some of the themes and ideas behind it. And we talk about its relevance for today, things like that, what it means to Dredd. So absolutely great chat. So strap in and enjoy a nice long deep dive into Judge Dredd Origins with Kelly Kanayama. You've been on the podcast before recently. You were on our Dredd Satire panel the other day. But do you want to, now that we've got a bit more time, do you want to explain a little bit about your work and your interest in Dredd?
Sure. So I'm Kelly Kanayama. Hi. I'm a comics and pop culture scholar and critic. I recently finished my PhD in comic studies at the University of Dundee. So I'm officially a doctor now, which is very exciting. And my research is in contemporary British authors' portrayal of America in comics. And so my thesis, the whole first entire chapter, was on John Wagner's Dredd, or rather, John Wagner's portrayal of America in Judge Dredd, and it's and how that is kind of that in 2000 AD more broadly is the basis for kind of what comics are like today in both in America and Britain.
Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful. Now, for this deep dive, you've chosen Origins.
Yes.
So John Wagner, Carlos Ezquerra, and also Kev Walker in the
beginning part.
And there, well, this was something that I think, based on interviews that I've read with John, wasn't all that keen on exploring prior to a certain point, but once he'd returned to Dredd in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was clear that he was actually beginning to think, well, maybe this is a story that I should tell, because Dredd's world had always been one of those histories that you had to piece together.
Yeah.
From oblique reference, well, not so oblique, direct or oblique references within the strip. I'll start off by asking, it might be a bit of an involved question. Do you think John did the right thing in mapping out that which had always been implied before?
I think the way that he did it, sure. Yeah. I mean, in and of itself, why not? You know? Why the heck not? Yeah, I don't really see any argument for or against it. That said, I think if you are going to do it, it should be kind of the way that he did it here, where it's a lot of it is told kind of, it's mediated through other characters in the comic versus just, oh, here's a flashback and now we're just going to do the whole origin story, you know? It's through people watching like educational films. It's through Judge Dredd telling other people about things that happen, and then that sort of frames the flashback because there's some things in the flashback that he, you know, that he couldn't possibly have known about. But yeah, I think it's framed really well, and I think in Judge Dredd, certainly, as you know, the comic has at that point was, you know, very, very solidly past 2000 AD in real life. It was worth kind of looking back and I guess just taking stock, because it seems like an attempt not just to consolidate the origin story of Dredd, or not Dredd, but of the judges and the legal system of Mega City 1, but of the ideals underlying the comic as a whole, or underlying kind of what he was maybe trying to do.
Well, one thing that really struck me is how reminiscent the framing device of Origins is to the kind of thing you get in war comics. So although an awful lot of this stuff wasn't told in flashback, but you know, things like Darkest Mob and Charlie's War and things like that notion of looking back at something, and it allows him to pack in a lot of information you would normally think of as too much exposition. You know, if you're doing this, if you're telling a story like this in real time, there's if you're going to tell an in-depth story, there's a lot of exposition you've got to do, and that's a difficult trick to pull off. You know, John is you know, one of the best ever writers in comics, certainly in my opinion, but his characters aren't verbose. They're not the kind that will just go here is, you know, 2 pages of exposition. So it that kind of history lesson notion allows him to do what he wouldn't do if it was a real time story, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and I think there's something in there too of that. It, you know, when you mention war comics, like as a doc as well, but you know, which he wrote, there's this very kind of specifically British tone to it, because you know, America had war comics, but they not in the same way that Britons had it, and certainly not in the way of like, you know, that sort of gritty revisionist revival in the 70s that Britain had. And so I think by kind of aligning it narratively with those kinds of comics, it's also really entrenching, this is a British comic by, you know, for British readers, and it's set in America, but this is British.
Well, I mean, I've said this on the podcast before. I think on the panel the other day, it's always really important to remember when talking about the relevance and any kind of predictions that the Dredd strip made, that the Dredd strip has always used America and American politics, American culture as a mirror for what's happening in Britain. So even if it's talking directly about something that's happened in America, it's saying something about here, because this is where its audience primarily is, you know?
And I wonder, you know, if part of the thing with America that when you're talking about legal systems and things like that, there's a lot of really quotable stuff that America has. And I don't know if Britain has the same things because, America has the Constitution, which comes up in Origins, and it has the Declaration of Independence. And, those are two set documents, and Britain has various things. But, as I remember from my Life in the UK test for my settlement visa application, Britain doesn't have a written constitution in the way that America does, or that a lot of other countries do. So that probably helps too, that it gives the characters something to say. Look at this single document.
Well, I mean, that's something that's very relevant at the moment with this kind of notion of originalism, where certain commentators are trying to read something like the Constitution as an immutable document.
Yeah.
Cannot be interpreted in any way, shape or form. But all of British law is based on precedent.
Sure.
So I mean, lots of people start quoting Magna Carta, not the Magna Carta. They start quoting Magna Carta
my bad.
and the Bill of Rights, but those things don't actually have relevant because they've been superseded in our system.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, we could talk extensively about how the judges combine British notions of policing with the American myth of the cowboy and Slotkin's evolution of the cowboy into pop, but that would be a separate discussion, I feel.
Okay, sorry.
See, this is exactly what I mean. It's a, when talking about Dredd, it's because Dredd plays with notions of America, which is the very thing that you've been studying. One can get caught up in the Americanism of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the Americanism, but the sort of notion of the way that the Wild West was constructed. I think this is Slotkin. Oh my God, there were so many books. I wrote a huge chunk about this for Preacher, actually, but for my chapter on Ennis's work. But like the notion of the Wild West as being sort of this fictionalized. It had this fictionalized history even as it existed. Yeah. Oh dang. But yeah, like, and that's a lot of what is in Origins. This idea of this all of the histories people have been told, and kind of a lot of the histories you actually see is that important bits are left out or glossed over or actively hidden. There's a lot in it of televised messages, of constructed narratives, where people are lying or omitting otherwise pertinent information.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll come on to talking about what this does to Dredd continuity later on, but there's that notion that for a very long time, the readers and therefore the people in Mega City 1 have been lied to.
Yeah.
The invitation that was to the judges was less of an invitation and more of a them taking what they decided they wanted to say. But we'll come on to talk about that in a little bit. But I want to talk turn to the kind of nitty gritty, and we'll start off with talking about the connection, which is the kind of prequel to Origins that John Wagner did with Kev Walker. Now this and it's helped by Kev's artwork. This is pure noir. This is 100% Raymond Chandler. Even down to the kind of the way that Kev frames the lighting in these pages. What do you think about the connection as a preamble to what's going to happen in Origins?
I like it kind of because it doesn't set you up for how big it's going to be. I mean, something is coming because this is, this is a pretty serious situation with the with the secret box and this thing. It has to be it didn't matter how it got to the Hall of Justice, kind of, and they sprinkle in little hints, but it's like, but all that matters is that it gets there. And so of course, yes, you're wondering what could it be, but yeah, there's no indication of this is going to shake everything up forever or things like that. And which I like because you never, in real life, you don't get that. I mean, you might guess, but you don't get definitive proof until after it's over. So yeah, I really like that, and I think I quite like the art that it leading into the Ezquerra art, which is the scratchy lines and the kind of loosely spiky look, but still with that touch of humor, because the guy, the mutant guy, has the mutants. There's the guy with like his little his peck, his talking pack, whose name is Chuck Titman. I love that, and I think that's that also I like, because it just really sets the tone for it's gonna be serious, but it's still also going to be kind of ridiculous because this is Judge Dredd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's it makes such a big deal of something that you say is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's just John thinks, how do I get this box? How do I spark this story? Well, he makes a drama out of it. He makes a ticking time bomb of a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that wonderful image right at the end of, after all the action, after he shot the mutants and everything.
Yeah,
you've got that kid just on his own carrying that box into the Hall of Justice, and that's so wonderfully understated, and that's always, for me, been a hallmark of John's work, is how dated it is,
Yeah, and it, rereading it in preparation for this, I was kind of struck that they didn't arrest the kid, because I thought, surely that's like a misdemeanor or something, right? Like accepting packages from a stranger. Yeah. Anyway, that's not the point, but I just thought, how is this kid not in trouble?
It's one of those things that the strip often does, is when it wants to be comedic, it will do things like that. So you see plenty of stories where from like City Block back in the 120s, I think it was, all the way through where someone's foolishness, someone's rashness, someone's moral turpitude creates these terrible situations, and they get jailed for it. And other times when it's not important to the story, John just doesn't do that. It's like, I don't need that, so I'll carry on. So I always find that fascinating when it does or does not happen. Sorry, I just noticed that my email is still on. So with moving into the main strip, someone pointed out, I was reading something the other day about how it's very rare for John to telegraph what he's going to do at the start of something. He said in the interview I did with him, that he's very much an instinctive writer, so he'll start writing and then work it out as he goes along. But a few times in his career, he's really signaled it. Obviously America, the Dead Man, things like that. And here, you've got you start off Origins with this splash page showing key moments of the story ahead, and whether that was done after it happened or before, nonetheless it comes at the start. And that's a real kind of statement of intent for John, I think, on something like that, isn't it? For him to say, well, the gloves are off, here's the kind of mad shit that you're going to be dealing with.
Well, I mean, like, is there, do you guys have the scripts for still have the scripts for Origins? Because I'd be curious to see if if it already had all that in there. And if it did, what if that was like, okay, so these are definitely going to be in here.
Yeah.
Beyond that, let's find out, because I still remember that bit in the America scripts, which I can say this because it's out now. The America Lost and Found, with the scripts and everything, where there's this wonderfully descriptive bit about where the Statue of Judgment goes and where Ami's body is going to be, and maybe it's wrapped in the flag, and so maybe have the head stinger or whatever. And it's actually quite detailed. And then there's some other bits that are like, well, maybe some graffiti. I don't know. You'll figure it out. Or there's some stuff like, oh, draw this. Like, this might be important later.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I would. I'd need to see if Matt still has the scripts, but it's
like the pitch that one page.
Oh, yeah. The story is quite involved. There's a lot of callbacks. There's a lot of foreshadowing. So for me, this is probably the densest story that I think John has done for Dredd. In that, clearly, he talks about in interviews the amount of thinking he did about how things fit together, how to incorporate elements of existing continuity, what to leave out, how to make it feel like a combined whole.
Yeah.
I mean, what with the beginning of the story? What are your impressions visiting it now about what the story is saying you can expect?
Okay, so if you've read a lot of Dredd, it feels like it's one of those the stories where he takes the recruits into the cursed earth, and then one of maybe the brash one learns a lesson, or maybe the one who he kind of wrote off at the beginning proves themselves, and then they run into some mutants, and then they meet somebody who they don't know what to make of them, and a strange and harrowing time is had by all, and then they come back to Mecca City 1. Maybe they get Fargo, maybe they don't. I mean, that's usually kind of the standard. Oh, we have to. There's something or somebody in the cursed earth that we have to go get, or we have to go take care of, and there's lots of stories like that. And so I feel like he's setting this up to be, it is possible to read it as, or to see it as, priming people for that, but just the stakes are higher this time because obviously it might be somebody important, and if it's not, then they need to find out what it is. Yeah. But then it, of course, is so much more than that, and I think that's pretty cool.
One of the things I like about Origins is how it addresses the past, not just the past that we don't know, but the past that we do know. There's a page when he's fighting the mutant raiders.
Yeah.
At the beginning, where this is classic Ezquerra. The picture of Dredd with his gun by his face, and you see his enemies. I mean, it's a trick that he pulled in Strontium Dog as well. And there's the captions, he is angry with himself. He had allowed them to be sidetracked, and now their mission was in danger of failing before they had begun. It was clear dereliction of duty, and someone was going to pay. That, for me, whether consciously or not, is a clear callback to the Cursed Earth. And the fact that all the way through that mission, Dredd is continually sidetracked. There's only a few episodes. Well, there are a few episodes where he'll just go, no, I realize this is a Pat's version of Dredd than John's, but where Dredd will just go, no, wherever I see law breaking, I must go and solve it. And you're like, we're on the clock.
Yeah, people are dying. People are eating each other, Dredd. Come on. But I think that's also, I think, because that's the first time they really go into the Cursed Earth, right, as Pat Mills. And so that sort of sets the tone of every time they go into the Cursed Earth, it's like a road trip that goes horribly, horribly wrong. And so you know, either they get what they accomplish what they were going to do, or they don't. But like, that's the point. Is I was going to say the point is not, you know, do you accomplish your goal or not? It's the people you shot along the way. It's like the friends you made along the way, but for judges, you know.
The information film that
Yes,
Dredd comes across in Fargoville. Your impressions of that scene? Go on.
it's so good. Like, okay, I really, really like how they set it up so that you never see Fargo's face in it, because obviously you can't, because Dredd is a clone, right, of him. So they would have the same face, especially as Fargo gets older. So I really love how they shot it. So it's like, oh, here's footage of him hugging his parents at his graduation, and it's shot from the back for no other reason than that. Or like, you know, here's an image of here's some footage of him playing high school football, and you know, he never takes the helmet off, and all of this stuff. Or like in the footage of him addressing the Congress is like is shot kind of from here down. Because who does that? Which I thought that's just, I mean, it's very obvious what's going on, but I thought that was really, really fun. And that is to me like kind of a callback to older Dredd comics, where they would go to ridiculous lengths to not show his face. Like, you know, there's scenes where I think a couple of scenes I've seen where he's in the shower or something, and he's wearing the helmet, or like he sleeps. And it's either with the helmet on, or when he or the lighting is such that you can see his mouth moving, but like kind of everything from here up is in shadow.
Yeah, it's that classic in the bath story where the strip, the artwork never shows the top part of his face, even though he's in the bath. And then he's like seriously injured and he's in the med bay, he's either
strapped up to here,
wrapped up top.
It's so good.
It's wonderful. Absolutely.
But it also, you know, I don't know how often John Wagner's been to America, like as an adult, because I know he's been a few times. That's why Peachtree's block in what's it called in the Dredd movie is called that, right? Because wasn't it like somewhere he stayed?
No.
Or was it somewhere Alex Garland had?
It was where Alex Garland met him.
Okay.
It was a restaurant, cafe.
That's it. Okay, but yeah, like he's been a few times, but I don't. It really does capture something of the, you know, the educational film about the great leader, and it is this kind of. I haven't seen as many British ones, but I think there is something uniquely American about it that. Not only does it say, oh, he was good at things, he was good at like these very specific kinds of things that all fit into the narrative, because there's a little side thing where it's like, oh, also, he was really interested in dinosaurs or something, and that has nothing to do with him becoming a judge. It's just a little fun fact. No. Because that's nerd stuff. Like, you know, he's good at football, so he's a jock. He's a cool jock. He's good at law. So yes, he's smart, but it's practical, you know? It's not like he majors in something and then he ends up pursuing law, even though in America, like, you can't major in law, you're pre-law. You have to do something else and then you go to law school. But like, yeah, you know, you can tell that it's been constructed to tell this very specific kind of story about this person, and it's just supposed to kind of, it's filling in the gaps, but only certain gaps, because it's supposed to confirm what you think you already know. And I mean, oh no, I'm going off track like they do with the Cursed Earth. But okay, so I grew up in Hawaii, and I try to go back there for Christmas when I can. Not this year, because yeah, flying through the mainland U.S. airports is not safe. And the last time I was home, we went to the Polynesian Cultural Center because my mom wanted to go. And it's a very, very touristy place. But oddly, they get, it's run by BYU, the Mormon. It's run by the Mormons.
Okay.
And they get all the performers and stuff are students who are actually from various places in Polynesia. That said, there was this thing about they gave us like presentation about how, you know, all these cultures met and they mingled with each other, and I know it was trying to present the idea of cultural mixing and content as a good thing, but I thought, and nobody killed each other. And then I thought, hold on, for a religion that's built, you know, that relies so heavily on things like missionary work, you have to assume that whenever one culture rolls up into another one, that it's all going to be fine. You can't introduce the possibility of, you know, this culture invaded, or like people from this culture invaded this other place. You can't ever say that. And I think, and so it was all fine and it was all great and everyone sang something. The end. And I feel like that's what the Fargo film is like. You know, oh, he was great, and then he was great, and he did some more stuff, and it was great. And then some people, the pencil pushers in Congress didn't like it, but he was a cool guy who was smart, and he played football, so he knew what the people wanted. And then they had the judges, you know, the end. And then singing became illegal, maybe, I don't know. But it was for the best. And there's a part that stands out. Like, I'm assuming everything in it is supposed to be actual footage of him, right? Like, all the footage of him is actually him, I'm assuming, right? And not like a reenactment.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's...
So there's a, you know, with the voice of, is it a voiceover? I'm actually gonna check where he's in Congress.
Yeah.
Talking about like civil unrest and things. Oh, here we go. Where'd it go? Oh yeah. The voiceover says, you know, the president is reacting against the tide of civil unrest and gang warfare that had turned major cities into battlegrounds, and he appointed Fargo government special prosecutor for street crime, which isn't the thing, but
I hesitate to say yet, but
yeah. I mean, that's just a vague. I think like street crime is just such a very kind of almost too understandable. Like, people know what streets are and people know what crime is, you know? Yeah, you would have to call it something really fancy. But, you know, he's talking about like, oh, this is reclaiming the nation for the people and things like that. I'm like, wait, isn't civil unrest just people being mad about stuff? And gang warfare, like, okay, that sucks, but I mean, those are people too. I'm assuming. So, unless these are robots or something. But, like, when you say for the people, I'm like, no, everyone who lives there is people. What a weird way to put it.
This is certainly something that has cropped up in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's out of the populist playbook, the use of the people as this amorphous entity, which one can ascribe whatever values one wishes. You know, you can say, you can do anything in the name of the people without necessarily asking what all the people want, because of course lots of people want different things. So it's interesting that John reflects kind of populist authoritarian language. So the whole thing about, you know, special prosecutor for street crime, that does that wonderful thing of combining a concept that people understand while being sounding specific, but still being broad enough that actually it allows whatever you want. So, you know, these broad definitions are exactly the kind of thing that can be dangerous in lawmaking. So one of the tenets of the rule of law is that laws must be specific and must be understandable. And the wonderful thing about the evolution of Dredd is that he takes that and shows actually how that can be as bad. You know, because there's prohibitions about owning too many goldfish and
Right.
doing this, dropping litter and all this and the other. But yeah, all the way through this sequence where you're seeing this footage, the moral framing of everything is fascinating, and John absolutely nails, as he and also Alan Grant always did, absolutely nailed that that style of language, that style of talking about things that sounds perfectly reasonable, but should be quite chilling.
Yeah, and I think the voiceover really underscores that, which I like. So, when the Frog was talking about, like, what we have to do is basically crack the hell down on crime, for the people. And there's a little thing about the no-go areas, which did make me laugh. But the voiceover is saying, that truly good men are few and far between, and so he's one of the last good men left in America, and that's why he's doing this. They don't just leave it. They don't just say, like, there was only one place for him to exercise his talents, Washington, and then here's just some footage. No, they have to add the extra thing so you know that what he's doing is good, that he's doing this because he's a good man. And and there's no room for, like, wait, if he was a good man, and he studied law and everything, why couldn't he have thought about, I don't know, like, rehabilitation programs, about, prison reform, about all, these kinds of things? I mean, and then so maybe the cops wouldn't be so busy.
Yeah, I mean, that's straight out of Slotkin's Gunfighter Nation, the idea of moral goodness, excusing immoral behavior.
Sure.
So it's the whole thing about violence is bad, but violence of the state is good. And in that you have the embodiment of the lawman. So therefore, everything the lawman does in the service of good is itself good.
Yeah.
Regardless of its actual nature. I want to move on a little bit because you almost immediately start getting into, and this is something that both Pat and John have dwelt on, is this twin thing.
Yes.
Now, Pat was very big into this when he rewrote, expanded upon the return of Rico in the mid-90s to tie in the Stallone movie. He seemed to be coming at it from a very classical point of view,
right.
Romulus and Remus and Cain and Abel, and kind of Shakespearean duality to that had always been there. But with John, it almost feels like he's much more practical. He's talking about genetic determinism.
Yeah.
I wonder what you thought about this role within Dredd, and particularly Origins, of the whole Joe and Rico thing.
Okay, so one of the things that stood out to me here, and it just leaps out at me again, and it's always kind of stuck out, is that how come they call, even when they're kids, why do they call Joe Dredd and then they call Rico? That's weird. Anyway, that's not the point. But but then I think, to me, that's like as a little signal of, I can see why they do that, just for kind of, Dredd is Dredd, Rico is Rico. But, like, Rico's the one who's more human. And, humanity can be good, humanity can be bad, humanity can be a lot of things. I mean, Rico contains a lot of the bad, but then, he also did make a baby at some point, so that's less bad. I mean, assuming everything was consensual and blah blah, but then he did dish her, so that's bad. But I think there, the idea of, like, this degree of control, you can see it as, seeing it as the judges wanting to exert control from the start, and that the cloning program as an extension of that. That Dredd and Rico are supposed to be like these super judges. Well, obviously Rico wasn't. And, we know from earlier things, and that he was, or rather, should I say, he was, until he really, really wasn't. And that's like all the cloning, all the control, all the whatever you want to do in the world. You can't stop Rico from Ricoing, and you just like Fargo has this twin brother who is never ever ever mentioned. But I think the idea of the twin is, I don't want to say the good twin and the bad twin, because I mean, this is Dredd. So okay, the law-abiding twin and the not law-abiding twin, or the known twin and the secret twin with the giant chin. Is this idea of the kind of shadow, like the shadow self, like the Eve. And so I'm not quite looking at it as a Cain and Abel thing of, one tries to kill the other, or one is that, but one is the sort of displaced, I guess the displaced humanity of the other, because, the other Fargo, what's his face, Ephraim has some kids, I guess, and they have some kids, and so on and so on. And, there's a whole bunch of descendants of Ephraim Fargo, and they seem happy. They were just living their lives on the cursed earth with their huge chins and, getting on with their lives. And that's everything that Fargo's system says no to. And so it all gets displaced onto this other guy. And I think with Dredd and Rico, there is that echo, that reminder of, Dredd and Rico. There's a bit where they say, we're always going to stick together, right? And, well, of course they don't. But I think that's the sort of, that underscores this idea of, the judges created this system where you can't really be human if you're going to uphold it. You can't, you can't have these attachments. You can't have the emotional bonds that people have.
Well, that's the judges, and Dredd is supposedly the prime judge.
Yeah.
Are meant to be humans stripped of all humanity, in the same way that the society that they serve is society stripped of all its extraneous nature. So the idea that if you get away with the bothersome elements, the bits that get in the way, then you'll get down to a kind of purity,
right? Yeah.
And I think that's a very kind of Jacques Derrida esque deconstruction of liberal democracy. That if you would strip all this stuff out, you'll get down to this single moment, the undeconstructible moment. I mean, justice. Derrida used the phrase. I don't speak French because I'm going to mispronounce this, but droit or drot, I can't remember what it is, but it means force. It means right.
Yeah.
It's not just justice. It is might as well. It is known by right.
And if we're talking about Derrida, like Ephraim and Rico are the ontologies of this system. Yeah. Absolutely.
I love the fact that I'd always wondered why Rico was called Rico. As you say, why did they call him Joe? And why Rico? And of course, the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act only came into effect in the States in 1970. So Rico became a thing in the very decade that Dredd was created. So I don't know if that wasn't, I'm not saying that's but I love the idea that corruption is baked even into his name. Like it's there from the very beginning. And we could get into the biblical significance of Joseph, but we're not going.
Okay, then you're gonna say Rico. I'm like, there's no Rico in the Bible.
You know what I mean. I like the point you were making about the presentation of Fargo as this upright citizen. When the story goes out of its way to say no,
Yeah.
there is corruption. There is humanity within him.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the fact that John goes into such detail about that humanity is his comment on what has happened to Dredd. You know, Dredd is a character. Is Dredd any better because he has had these things taken out of him, or is Fargo actually the symbol of justice because he is flawed? I want to know what you thought on that.
I mean, I think part of it is like it's maybe an acknowledgement that these systems are always built by people, and you know, people are people. Even the most inhuman people are people. You know, dictators have cartoons that they like. They have their pets. They have girlfriends, whatever. And I like that you know, that was his human failing. It wasn't like, oh, he had a drug habit. He gambled. He just got horny sometimes. And I guess that is the sort of, you know, that's the acceptable one, right? I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm just, you know, but it does illuminate this idea that, you know, nobody can live up to. It's very hard to live up to your own standards, and it's, you know, and far the person and this system, it kind of drove home that like people often don't see themselves as being subject to the same systems that they think everybody else should be. You know, and that, in light of the fact that this is called Origins, and this is an origin story, I think it drives home this idea of, you know, Mega City 1 trying to live up to this, or the judges trying to make the city live up to this particular standard that it's never, ever, ever going to live up to, because they're all human. I mean, the judges are human, even the judgiest of them. I mean, Dredd has this little moment where, you know, now that he finds out that he's genetically related to mutants, he's like, maybe we should let him in. You know, he has his moments, and you know, he's got Vienna, and he's got his niece, and he does care about her. Yeah, I think no matter what, it's this idea of you set the system up to fail, just like Fargo set himself up to fail. And the more they crack down, the more it's going to fail. And so it's this system that, if you apply it in real life, is going to eat itself.
Yeah, it's one of those fascistic elements that you know, and paternalistic as well. The kind of, well, if you would just behave yourself, then we'll stop hitting you.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I just remembered. Have you seen that cartoon where it's and the angel said, "Stop hitting yourself," but Jacob could not, for the angel was hitting him with his own hands.
Yes, I have seen that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
But yeah, it's that notion of you know, this world requires the judges. When Origin shows that the judges are at least partially responsible for the creation of that world in the first place.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that with Origins really strikes at the heart of the whole Justice Department thing, is that it is an origin not just of the reality of Mega City One and
Mhm.
the historical reality, but the origins of the lie. And of course, when you get to the lead up to Necropolis, Dredd starts asking about what is the big lie. Now, in totalitarian terms, that's something ever slightly different. But with fascism, the big lie is that if you surrender your freedom willingly,
Mhm.
then we will keep you safe.
Yeah.
And that for me, rereading Origins again, that for me is always in the background of my mind. This kind of, this paternalistic, extreme reaction of, we'll keep yourself if you we'll keep yourself safe if you would just behave yourselves.
Yeah. And then there is too that moment of, constitutional originalism, and then you think, oh, whoa, that's Breaking Bad.
There's a wonderful bit in when the judges suspend the Constitution. There's that wonderful bit where he says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all men are created equal. They are endowed with certain inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
Yeah.
At
least we're still alive, America. 1 out of 3 is not bad.
Exactly. And that's that kind of thing that John seems to enjoy returning to. That kind of, rights. I'm all for rights, but not at the expense of order. Well, then you're not for rights at all, then, are you? Because if all you want is order, then nobody has any rights in that situation.
But yeah, I think it's really a really good moment that that's where they went with it, because I mean, as we've seen recently, like whenever anyone kind of goes to constitutional originalism or the equivalent, it's almost never good. They're going to say something incredibly whack. And yeah, and again, but the way that it's set up is like you see how it got there, which is something we don't always get to do not in that amount of space. That the judges, Fargo sets up the judges, and the judges set up the system, and people react to that system. The government reacts to that system, and then the legislative government reacts to that system, and then the judges react to that, and then the executive branches and legislative branches react to that, and then the judges react to that, and so that's how they get there. And so it's like, well, you can see how they did it, because it's not as though the people are going to agitate for this enough on their own, because they probably can't.
Yeah, well, there's that wonderful bit in the same page where he's going on about the Constitution, where he says, "Until further notice and with your consent."
Yeah.
And it's like, but how can the people give their consent? Because
they already did. I think that's the idea, is that they already did, because, like, you've let us, quote unquote, do our thing.
Yeah, but that's a corruption of the social contract.
Yeah.
In that, the social contract. I mean, if you go back to Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan, the all supreme sovereign has the right to do whatever they want, so long as they provide peace and security. But then Burke and Locke, and to a greater or lesser extent, people like Rousseau, then expanded upon that and went, well, it's not quite that cut and dry, is it?
Yeah.
Because if you have an overweening executive, then who is actually protecting the people? Right.
And I'm good, to play judge's advocate for a second here. Define peace and security.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Dredd clearly, in the democracy storylines in America and in Origins, for him, peace and security means order.
Yeah, and I mean, I love what they've done on this, what Wagner and Ezquerra have done on this page too. That there's the giant Declaration of Independence behind kind of. And then there's just a sort of rusted out, burned up ruin.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of, all of these things, they go to get, when you put these three, part 1 and part 2 together, it leads to part 3. Yeah, I really, really like that.
I want to talk a little bit about the politics at this moment, because it's easy to certainly at the moment to look at somebody like Donald Trump and to see Judge Cal and to see Bad Bob Booth and all this other. But in this in Origins, is very clearly comparing Booth to George W. Bush.
Yeah, with the voting machines and everything.
Yeah. And that for me, it does two things. Number one, it places it in a historical moment, and basically the consequence of what's happening now is this. But also it shows that the kind of law and order narrative that's been going on since the 1970s has had a place in all of the presidents since. Maybe excluding Jimmy Carter. But there's lots of things you have to exclude with Jimmy Carter. With Reagan, with Bush 1, with Clinton, with George W. Bush, with Obama, and now with Donald Trump. That authoritarianism has always been there. And for me, that's what Judge Dredd has always been warning about, is that even when the hue of politician is one that you approve of, they're still part of this agenda. And there's a great book called Graphic Justice. When one of the I think they're a constitutional specialist. They're talking in there about the drone program under President Obama, which took it where his administration took it upon themselves to literally decide who could be executed without jury trial in other countries by their drone program. And you go, well, and places it in the context of something like Judge Dredd. So it's you can look at Origins and say, you can look at Donald Trump and say, well, Wagner wasn't talking about Trump, he was talking about George W. Bush.
At the time, sure.
Yeah, exactly. But he is effectively talking about all presidents, about this populism, about this the law and order narrative that leads you to this point. Learn the lesson. Don't look at the specifics. Learn the lesson that they're pointing to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are the things sprinkled in here, like we were saying. Well, first of all, there's the time that this came out. There's the reference to foreign states and their reserves. There's the extremely blasé British Prime Minister who's like, Britain is reluctant to condemn the actions of our American allies. Let us approach this crisis in a spirit of compromise. Which is obviously like a reference to Tony Blair's reaction to the Iraq War. But it's that's been the case since at least World War II. It's really hard, that I think this is part of the reason why this works so well. Origins works really well for me, and Wagner at his best in general works really well for me, is that it is usually about a system, a structure, rather than, it's not just about this one guy, this one time. Because there is no such thing as this one time. I mean, President Booth comes up in the Cursed Earth, like, I was going to say 40 years ago. No, at this point it would have been, almost 30 years prior. But he is, he looms large in the mythology of Mega City 1, both to the readers and both narratively. Because, when people think that's why they don't have presidents in America anymore, because of that guy. And I think there is that the idea of the wound that kind of reverberates through time, that no one at any point has said, well, okay, we have mayors, Mega City 1 has Ambrose, and even Dredd approves. So why hasn't anyone thought, okay, well, if this works on a mega city scale, why can't this work on a nationwide scale? And it's just never happened because of this idea of, talking about the system that was set up long before, X or Y person came into the picture. That was set up, well, by Fargo, really, but also by the people who, this is the other thing, by the people who elected the president, who re-elected the president, who let Fargo do what he was doing. Yeah, because if, sometimes you read this and you think, well, what if people had just not, had voted for someone else? Like, what if someone else had become president, and then Fargo would have got fired or something?
Well, this is something that runs throughout Dredd, is that notion of Megacity 1 is a frozen city. So it is a corporatist, late-stage capitalist city-state that is on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
But it is held on the edge by this extreme system. And questioning that system isn't allowed, even within Dredd himself. Because when he does question it, things go terribly wrong. Even if you exclude Necropolis, which wasn't, him walking away didn't necessarily cause Necropolis. But, he wasn't there to act, so we'll never know. But certainly when you get Tour of Duty after Origins, he tries to change the system.
Yeah.
It causes this very rigid system to break. And for me, it goes back to Question of Judgment, where he talks to Morph, his mentor.
Yeah.
There's, wear tight boots, because it stops you thinking about the big questions. It stops you thinking about the system and keeps you focused on the ground. And that echoes all the way through. I think it's in The Pit as well, where he wants to be on the street because that's where everything makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's why isn't that why the first chief judge after Fargo resigns? Like he goes back to the street.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because he said, he can't deal with the backstabbing and the politics. Like on the street, things are honest, and I'm like, do you not know what lets you be on the streets? Okay, whatever, my guy.
Well, no, because it's part of that atomization that you break everything down to its constituent parts, and you don't have to worry about what's happening to the whole thing. You just have to, deal with the individual thing. But I realise the amount of time we've been chatting away. I do want to move to the end.
Yes.
So spoilers, anybody who's not read Origins, you really should.
Pause this. Read it now.
And just coming back to the point I was just making, when you have a crisis and you sweep away protections, you sweep away rights, which is exactly what happened when the judges came in. There's that question of, people say, well, why are there judges? Well, because Bad Bob Booth was such a terrible president, he did all this, so the judges came in. You go, okay, well then what happens after that?
Right, and I mean they came in before that, but never mind.
Well, you know what I mean. It was all part of it. When I see that they came in, they took over. Yeah. So, because there was a crisis, they needed to sort things before they all fell apart. So go, fine. Well, what happens next? And of course, what Fargo says to Dredd is, it wasn't meant to last forever.
Yeah.
I tried to fix it, but it's in you to sort it.
Yeah.
To take us through this perpetual crisis that we've been in for 50, 60 years. What's your take on this moment, and particularly Dredd's reaction?
Well, part of me wants to say that's not fair to Dredd, really, is it? what he's known the rule of law, and then all of a sudden, fix it. No. If you say it was never meant to be forever, fine. But what was, like you say, what was your plan? Fargo's never like, okay, we're gonna do this until some quantifiable metric reaches this point. And then we're going to, phase it out by doing this and this and this and this. No, nothing. So, whenever someone says, oh, these are temporary measures, okay, and then what? And then if they have nothing, then but I think that's a very, I don't know, it seems like for Dredd, that just seems like a very existentially compromising moment. Because, I mean, again, like, Fargo isn't his dad, but he is Fargo, genetically, yeah. And so Fargo's kind of saying, you shouldn't exist. Like, you should never have existed.
Well, I don't know if it's...
No, maybe not never, but, like, you shouldn't be existing like this now.
Yeah, I think it's really key that Fargo obviously doesn't know that Rico is dead.
Yeah.
So he repeatedly says, it's you and Rico.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, so it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Because, if we go back to Rico... Yeah, Rico's the human part.
Yeah.
And so they have to fix it, but Rico's dead. So
the human part, it's never going to work.
Yeah.
And it's so pointed, that moment is so pointed that John in the script says, you and Rico, you can do it.
Yeah.
And they can't because Rico's dead.
Yeah.
Because Joe exorcised him. So I know it's not necessarily a kind of Cain and Abel dynamic with the two of them, but it is that moment for me. It evokes that moment of after one of the brothers has killed the other.
Cain kills Abel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew.
In the moment, I couldn't remember which way around it was. I was like, I don't want to get this wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's the angel comes and says, where is your brother?
It's God, but yeah.
Oh, it's God. There we go.
Yeah,
God,
the Cain's like...
Just really doing well. God comes, where's your brother?
Yeah.
And then everything goes wrong. They're cast out into the wilderness.
Yeah, Cain lies.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't lie, but he evades the question.
So for me, it's that kind of, you've screwed it over now. The future was in both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, but then again, it points back to Fargo to say, like, okay, well, why didn't you set something up? So it could have been. Because, whatever happened with Rico, like, whatever kind of pushed him to the Breaking Bad point, maybe they could have fixed it in a sort of workable way without making him completely inhuman. But I guess we'll never know. Because of this standard that Fargo set up that he himself didn't live up to. Well, live up to, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And it's worth, after that, Hershey said, well, what did he say to you? And Dredd's like, well, what did he say to you? And Hershey's like, oh, about, the city and keeping the faith and blah, blah, blah. And then, Dredd's like, yeah, he said it's pretty much the same. And I had a moment of wondering, what did he really tell Hershey? Because we don't see that.
Yeah, true.
So, I mean, for all I know, she's lying too. And I think I really, that's a really good ending of, like, Dredd is continuing that legacy, not just by upholding the legal system that Fargo originally established, but by continuing this practice of lying about it so that the system can endure.
Yeah, well, it's the great lie. Dredd is now complicit in the great lie.
Yeah,
that it is meant to go on forever. And it's that for me the moral, and you must tell me what you think the moral of this story is. But for me, the moral is, this is what happens when you strip away the rights and freedoms that everybody has, is that there is nothing to stop as a result of that from perpetuating itself forever. You know, this is a fascist future, you know, one of perpetual crisis. You know, at least the Roman dictators handed back power after they were done with it. So it's, you know, it's that kind of, you know, you may have temporary safety and security, but that system is never going to go away. Once you've removed those checks and balances on it, power will perpetuate itself forever.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, like, I totally agree. And adding to that, I would say this, you know, looking back at my most recent reading of Origins made me think, God, just everyone in this is lying all the time. But it's not just, you know, it is in this case to uphold an openly fascist system, but I think, you know, what I talked about, I brought up on the satire and policing episode on the podcast, about, you know, now in British schools, they're not allowed to talk about things like openly preaching anti-capitalism, or, you know, something about, I don't know if it's Britain or just England, but it's something about, like, you know, that pushes a victimhood narrative. Yeah. And so it makes that, to me, is saying the origins, the narrative of the origins of Britain and of America, and probably a lot of other countries, is greatly shaped by a lot of people lying to you all the and omitting the ghosts, and omitting omitting all the things that don't fit into the narrative, like Ephraim, like Fargo not actually being dead, and it's just kind of this idea of everybody's doing it all the time. And that's just the kind of idea of nationhood as we know it now. And that, you know, what we have now is maybe we have a better idea that people are lying, but we still don't know about what and how much. And I mean, you know, they bring up the Declaration of Independence. Well, think about who wrote it, and think about that it was legal to own people back then, and that the people who wrote it did, you know. And for those people, for those people who were treated as property, to throw off those oppressors was illegal. And yet, right? So they're not, I don't know if I would say they're lying, but they're leaving out some stuff that's pretty important. And maybe that's something, you know, inherent to the construction of nationhood and collective identity, certainly in Britain and America. I'm just focusing on those because that's what this is about.
No, well, I was going to ask, in terms of the work you've been doing over the last few years, writing about contemporary portrayals of America in British comics. What does Origins say about how we view America, and also what does it say about us?
When you say us, you mean British people?
British people.
Okay, just checking. Gosh, I mean, it's hard to say what it says about British people. Like, I can tell you what it maybe says about the way that the writers saw the particular writers I was talking about saw it. But it is this overwhelming idea of America as this, you know, it's a weird dichotomy of being this all-encompassing concept, like you see in Pax Americana, you know, the Multiversity Pax Americana, where it just circles back around on itself, but around everything else that it contains, and it just never, ever, ever ends, and it goes around and around and around forever. And then you have America in Judge Dredd. Oh, like half of my first chapter's about that. It's there's so much in there. Where it becomes, you know, where America becomes sort of something to chase in and of itself, versus, you know, responding to certain events or phenomena that are happening, and it just so happens that they're happening in America. Yeah, it becomes this thing that they're chasing. It becomes this representation of, you know, it is a dream. It's either a dream of freedom or it's a dream of, you know, the great something that you're trying to, the giant that you're trying to cut down, or the tower that you're trying to scale, the whatever. But sort of the more you press into it and the more you try to own it, the hollower it becomes, and the more it just becomes a sort of shell of itself. In the depiction and in the treatment of it, in comics, I should say. I don't mean British authors have like made America worse. And then of course there's the end of stuff where America is this country of myth, and that's fun, but it's not always good. That myth is fun, but you have to learn how to deal with it and evolve, or you'll become a monster, and you'll destroy everyone and everything you've ever loved, and you yourself will be unable to feel love eventually.
Well, yeah. That in of itself is a podcast series, probably in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you've spent several years writing about.
Oh, and America should stop being a dick.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Kelly, this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Chatting away. I really enjoyed that, and it's one of those Dredd stories that, for me, I kind of alluded to this earlier, cements John's and Carlos's reputations as the best.
It's so good. It's just so good.
It's so dense, and it's one of those stories where, you know, the more you dig, the more you find.
Yeah.
And you can read it straightforward, and the point may well sail right over the top of your head. But John's strength as a writer has always been to write really readable stories that say deeply profound things when you go look, you know.
Yeah.
And they're there. You don't even have to dig very deep for them. They're right there.
Yeah.
But it is still, nonetheless, you know, a cracking read. It's incredible. It's
really, really good. Yeah, and I think it's amazing that, you know, the big plot beats don't feel fake. Yeah, they don't feel. And I mean, I'm rereading this now in the age of just mad clickbait about everything. So, you know, could so and so be in blah blah. It doesn't feel like that. It's just, oh, of course, oh, you know. But it's not. It just feels. It feels natural for the way that the story is progressing. I like it.
I do also love the fact that the core idea behind the whole thing is basically, when you boil it down, it's like a Troy McClure telly movie. You know, the president's head is missing. It's like the chief. I really like that.
Oh, it's good, yeah. And the money burning off is such a good touch.
Well, thank you very much indeed to Kelly for that. Great fun to chat away. If you've got any suggestions for deep dives, do let us know. thrillcast@2000ad.com. We should be back in a week's time for more from the Thrillcast. More interviews, more deep dives. So, yeah, stay tuned. Help spread the word. And thank you for all your support. A bit miserable outside. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Take care of each other. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Splendid Birthrick.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic. at 2000adonline.com.